Hi, my name is Mariah Patton, and I am going to be briefly discussing discussion number three. Discussion number three is about the three chapters of the A People's History of the United States book. Starting with chapter number one, Columbus, the Indians, and Human Progress, we want to look at the influence of wealth and income along with the class and the population and how that kind of impacted that. So, just reviewing the wealth and where that kind of came from, Christopher Columbus was involved in this. According to page three, Christopher Columbus convinced the king and queen of Spain to finance an expedition to the islands. The wealth he expected would be on the side of the Atlantic, page 2. So, reviewing this, Christopher Columbus was someone who came from wealth, and he told basically the king and queen of Spain that he was going to go find wealth for them, and then they would return gifts to him and a little bit of wealth or profit to him. So he basically went on his expedition and went to the islands to go find the gold. And whenever he went there, he found some Indians. So, according to page 3, Christopher Columbus reported information regarding the Indians, such as they are so naive and so free with their possessions that no one had witnessed them and would have believed it. When you ask for something they have, they never say no. And again, this was page 3. So, whenever Christopher Columbus went over to the Indians, they were super nice. They wanted to give him gifts, they wanted to share with him, and he really was not for that. Christopher Columbus was over there for one reason and one reason only, and that was to get the gold. So eventually, Christopher Columbus decided to use the Indians as slaves and as servants to go find this gold for him. And eventually, on page 13, the English decided to exterminate the slaves. This was a lot of social injustice that we can see, and really reflecting that back onto challenge 2. Just reviewing that overall in chapter number 1, Columbus found gold. It was an uneven distribution as the Indians were utilized as servants or they were killed, and certain populations were mistreated, such as the Indians in this situation. We can see the higher class was Christopher Columbus and the king and queen and their people, and the Indians were not treated human. They were misvalued and they were used for this wealth, so it was very unfair. Reviewing chapter number 2, which is drawing the color. This reviews a lot about the Virginians and how they needed labor, so they sought out and attempted to get Indians or other people to do this work for them. So on page 25, it says the Indians would not work for them as they were tough, resourceful, defiant, and at home in these woods as the planted Englishmen were not. So the white settlers were skills craftsmen or men of leisure back in England, and they were not very inclined to work the land that John Smith had, which in those years had to declare a martial law to organize those into work gangs and force them into the field of survival. So during this time, they really attempted to get others to do the work for them. They were not willing to do that. It was again wealth and power. They were so focused on the wealth and power. The English settlers were, and so they attempted to get their slaves, such as the Indians or African slaves, to do that for them at this time. So overall, in chapter 2, it presents as slavery was a huge part of this time as English settlers attempted to force Indians into working. Also, African Americans were abducted, but they had a different opportunity with slavery than Americans did. The slaves were utilized for the people to make their wealth and their money for their labor. Again, with the social justice question in this discussion, the slaves, the Indians, the African Americans, they were not valued any sort of way. Just relating back to that, they were mistreated. So relating back to the wealth, they were used so that the English settlers could get that power and that wealth with their upper class. And then also chapter number 3. So chapter number 3 is the persons of mean and vile condition. So chapter 3 is mostly about the Bacon's Rebellion, and according to page 39, a rebellion of white frontiersmen joined by slaves and servants, a rebellion so threatening that the governor had to flee the burning capital of Jamestown, and England decided to send 1,000 soldiers across the Atlantic, hoping to maintain order among 40,000 colonists. This rebellion began by conflict to deal with like the Indians who were close by and constantly rebelling. So again, looking at chapter number 3, we see that the servants who joined Bacon's rebellion were part of the large underclass. They were of miserable poor whites who came to the North American colonies from European cities whose governments were anxious to get rid of them. So they were involved in this as well. And then also, all the cities that were built, they were starting to expand, such as Boston, New York, and others. And a lot of the cities had poorhouses in the 1730s because not just for old people or widows or crippled or orphans, but for employed or veterans or new immigrants, according to page 49. So overall, in Chapter 3, the Bacon's Rebellion was utilized for black and white slaves to go against their masters. During this time, some people were freed from debt, cities expanded, laws were created to prevent relationships from blacks and whites so that they couldn't create an alliance, and a middle class was created. Basically, this kind of just reflects back to the questions with wealth and social justice. We can see again in all 3 of these chapters, a lot of the people were mistreated, they were not valued, and the wealth was mostly given to the higher classes. There was a middle class created during this time. If you have any questions, definitely comment on my discussion. Thank you for listening.